Now here's David Smoak, Paul Catalina, and Craig Smoak.
All right, here we go. David Helman. Cowboys are an OTA. This is one you have to be at or should be at. David Helman with us Tuesdays in the 5 o'clock hour on SicEm365 Radio.
David, the defense obviously is the big offseason question. Have you been able to see anything that leads you to kind of get what Dan Quinn wants to do, shifting guys around or giving guys new roles?
I mean, yeah, the shifting around part is what stands out to me, and that's like this looks like a really multiple defense. And honestly, you know, not to scare anybody, but it looks very similar to a lot of the stuff they did last year or did last summer, I should say, just in the sense of how fluid this is. I mean, you see a lot of subbing in, a lot of subbing out. You see 4-man fronts, you see 3-man fronts. You know, obviously there's more linebackers than you know what to do with. And it's interesting to see the way that they mix and match personnel. You know, we've said before that Keanu Neal seems to, it looks likely that he's going to have a nickel and dime role as a pass coverage linebacker, but you've obviously got all these other guys you got to figure out what to do with. And that's through these 3 practices that we've seen, it's just a constant rotation, which is interesting. But, I mean, to be honest with you, it's hard to keep a handle on it all because they change the personnel so much.
David, is everybody pretty much there, expected to be there? I guess pretty much just the injured guys that aren't taking part right now?
Everybody was there. Yeah, I mean, there's roughly a dozen guys that are limited for one reason or another. Obviously, Amari Cooper's not practicing. He's coming off a scope. It's from the offseason. Zach Martin, DeMarcus Lawrence, Tristan Hill. Like, there's no small number of guys that are limited right now, but everybody is in the building.
So Tyron Smith discussed these stingers. I don't know if you've had one or not, but it can be crippling. I don't know. How do you fix a stinger problem? Do you go in there and what do they do? Do you even know that, David? How do they fix that? Just relieve some muscles, ligaments, what?
I mean, I'm definitely not a doctor. I was joking with a coworker right before I left the office today that, you know, it's kind of like turf toe. Like, stinger is such an innocuous sounding name. When you say stinger and you're like, oh, big deal. That can't be that bad. But in reality, I mean, it's nerve inflammation that runs all the way down your body. Like, it's terrible. I saw Tyron suffer a stinger from 50 feet away in Atlanta 2 or 3 years ago. And I mean, if you've ever seen Tyron Smith, he's a mountain of a man, and it reduced him to, I mean, he crumpled onto the ground because he was in so much pain. It's a lot. I don't know how they do it, but I mean, you know, my general understanding is that it's essentially a nerve that gets pinched or out of position, you know, in the cavities in your bones. I think they just kind of go in and relieve that pressure, and, you know, whatever's pinching it or putting pressure on it, they move it out of the way or get rid of it. And, you know, Tyron said he feels a lot more mobility in his neck and his arms since he did it. So it's definitely good news.
Most of the time you got a neck roll, you know, you try to stabilize the neck. And I always thought he had kind of, he played.
I had a stinger one time playing football. I'm not quite Tyron Smith, believe it or not, but my arm went completely numb for like minutes at a time, and it was really painful. So, yeah, I can see where it'd be problematic.
Yeah. All right, David Helman, DallasCowboys.com with us on Tuesdays in the 5 o'clock hour.
Yeah, they need better names for stuff. It's just
no, but if you've ever had one, that's a pretty damn close name. Yeah.
All right, David. What defensive ranking? You know, just kind of ballpark it. Would they need to be for you to think that they're going to have success past winning the division into the playoffs with the offense they'll have?
If we assume that the offense is everything we hope and dream it can be, I need you to be somewhere between 16 and 20 with a favorable turnover margin. I mean, part of that is on the offense. They got to be way cleaner. That's part of it. But, you know, they actually generated a surprising amount of turnovers in the last month of last season. Now, a big part of that's because they were playing bad quarterbacks. But if they can keep that roll going, like, I don't even need them to be mediocre. Like I said, like, you could be 20th in the league, but if they're getting, you know, if they're forcing more takeaways than they're giving up, and with that offense, I think that should be good enough for them to be pretty good. I mean, the Chiefs haven't been a juggernaut these last few years, but they're just good enough to help that offense out. I think that's all the Cowboys need.
So, David, I asked you about Randy Gregory probably 3 or 4 weeks ago or something like that. But it just seems like there's more and more positives that are being talked about. I know you had a couple of quotes up on Twitter today. Does it just feel kind of different around Randy Gregory right now, best you can tell, as far as just positive, thoughts and just optimism abound?
Not even just around him, like Randy himself. Like I've gotten to, I know Randy somewhat well at this point, which is, it's kind of funny when you think about how much time he's spent around the team, but he seems like a whole new person. And, he said today that he understands why people are curious about his past, but he wants to put it behind him. And, building trust is a big part of that. He's spent the majority of his career suspended, for better or for worse. But it doesn't, I haven't heard any bad thing about the guy since probably 2 years ago. And, it certainly seems, I know he's putting in the work on the field, and it certainly, just from talking to him and being around him and listening to him, it seems like he's put in a lot of work off the field as well. And for everything that guy's overcome, I don't know how you don't root for him. How many people that wrote him off at different points during his career. And I don't know how good of a season he's going to have, but it's all in front of him. I mean, if he plays well, he's in a contract year, which is weird to say because he's been on the same deal for 6 or 7 years at this point. But, he's going to have a big opportunity to change the narrative about him. There's no doubt about that.
Is it weird to hear that CeeDee Lamb, it's all true what he said, but he had a really, really good rookie year last year and, at times great to say like, oh man, I really didn't feel like I was ready to play going in because of the offseason. And now that they have the full offseason, that's pretty scary, isn't it, that he could be that much better?
Yeah, CD wasn't perfect. I brought that up the other day. I mean, it gets lost in the shuffle. He was an unquestionable success story, but there were drops, there were misplays. It wasn't all sunshine and roses. But for him to put that season together without Dak for the majority of the time and for all of the troubles they had on offense, yeah, it's absolutely impressive. And, it's a funny spot for me. Obviously, I'm a gigantic LSU homer. I love that Justin Jefferson broke out last year, and I think he's going to be a great player. But I absolutely think people are underselling CD a little bit because, Justin Jefferson, he had his quarterback. He had ideal circumstances throughout his rookie season, and CD really didn't. So I'm not going to be surprised if CD flips the script and reminds people why he was drafted ahead of Jefferson when they get a chance to play again.
I asked Paul and Craig this earlier on the Julio Jones trade from Atlanta to Tennessee. Corey Davis is no longer there. In the end, how much, even though he's a freak and he's one of the best receivers in football, how much difference really is there between Julio Jones and Corey Davis? And did Atlanta get enough in return for him?
I really appreciate that you respect my opinion enough. I mean, obviously, Julio's a freak, and I think people kind of undersell how good he still is. I mean, when he's healthy, he's as good as there is, and I think he's got plenty of good football left. Corey Davis didn't really live up to his pick. I couldn't speculate about how good he actually is. I've probably only watched 3 Titans games during his career, but I would absolutely take Julio over Corey Davis like 100 times out of 100, even with everything that he's, even with all the injuries that he's dealt with. So I think the Titans got better. As far as it's tough. And people joke about it, about, how expensive it is to move around on draft night as opposed to only getting a second and a fourth for Julio Jones. But the bottom line is cheap labor is how you win in the NFL these days. Like, those rookie contracts are everything. Like, obviously you got to find the right guy, but drafting a guy who can carry your team for 4 or 5 years for a fraction of the cost, that's how you win. I mean, that's how the Seahawks built a juggernaut. Patrick Mahomes, obviously he's amazing, but being able to surround him with talent because he's so cheap is a big part of why the Chiefs are so good. And I don't think you can put a premium on that. And, the point is, Julio's fantastic, but you're 32 and your contract's not easy to deal with. And that it drops your value in a league where people are always looking to get better for cheaper.
David, I think we're done on the Cowboys end, but how are you feeling about your LSU baseball team?
I love postseason baseball, man. And I don't have time, and I'm not a big enough diehard to watch all 60 games. But, it's kind of like college basketball. When you get into conference play, you start paying attention. And, the standard is high at LSU. So my expectations were really low, seeing that they weren't good enough to have a winning record in conference. But I know they're talented, and obviously they're going to play hard for Paul Mainieri because he's retiring when the season's over. So I'm not surprised they put a little bit of a run together. And, man, it would, I know Tennessee's great. I'm not taking it for granted, but this weekend was really fun. And what a story that would be if they could get to Omaha one more time for Paul.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time. As always, David Helman,
Thanks, guys.
DallasCowboys.com. The College World Series Championship